All right. I'm John Greathouse, and I'm here with Woody Sears and Mr. Kevin Costner. Woody is a serial entrepreneur, previously co-founding and CEO of Frog Dog Media, which was a successful company that created audiobooks for children on iPads and iPhones. And you'll see why that app is relevant as we talk more about HearHere and how that story really does dovetail with his current venture. We also have Kevin Costner with us here. If you don't know Kevin at this point, I want to welcome you back after a 3-decade coma. Kevin is a multi-award winning director, producer, actor, 2 Academy Awards, 2 Golden Globe Awards, 2 Screen Actors Guild Awards, and an Emmy, and I'm sure more on the way. And both really storytellers. So it's interesting that you guys have come together into this venture by very divergent backgrounds. So Woody, I'd love for you or Kevin could jump into on this one to hear about HearHere's value prop and really your business model so that people right out of the gate can understand what it's all about and whether or not they might be a good fit for the product.
Well, I think that's probably better for Woody to go on that particular one. I'm going to have some coffee with you and listen to what I got snookered into.
Yeah, you'll learn along with me.
Well, as startup life, it's constantly evolving, and our product today really is built for travelers to hear stories about the places they're driving through, and we really want to give people more perspective and give them history and give them information and anecdotes about this land, specifically in America on the roads, as they can hear about things like history, the natural wonders, local insights about an area. And that all comes in the form of an iPhone application. Download it to your phone, set up location access, and then as you drive into range of these stories, they're automatically going to pop up and automatically play on your phone or send you a push notification so you can choose to listen to it. Yep. And so that's what we're delivering today, a way to increase the joy of travel, and give people, more insight into these places they're venturing out into.
Yep. Well, the app, resonates with me because I'm a kid that grew up in a car. When my parents did take a vacation, it was a car ride, and staying at it wasn't even a Holiday Inn, but staying at the knockoff Holiday Inn was like the highlight of the trip. So we'd spend a lot of time in the car. And back then we didn't have our noses in our phones and our iPads. But I really like that you guys are pulling those noses out of those devices, even if it's for a brief moment where they're going to, kind of look around and get a feel for where they are before they dive back into the game or whatever they're doing. So I'm a fan. So I understand the company started out kind of really based on a love affair. It was apparently a love affair between 2 kindergarten kids. That originally
preschool. So our kids were way ahead of the other kids.
Oh, sorry, preschool. Yeah, I don't want to get anybody in trouble here.
They established that they would date early.
Nice.
But out of that, that's how you end up meeting the other parents, right? It's look, I mean, I wasn't like born in Hollywood. I was kind of, it's like, I'm taking care of my kids and watching them think. I mean, I was in those same back seats as you on vacations, going up to Bishop, going up to the High Sierras. Our vacations were, and we didn't have the kind of money. And I know the hotels you're talking about because it's actually led me to the way I actually live my life. I remember we never stayed in a hotel. We couldn't afford it. But that was at the time when all those hotels had their little pool right out in front by the highway with a chain link fence around it. And it always said heated. And it was never heated.
By the sun.
It was never heated. And it was like mossy, and it was that. And I just remember being so kind of my first experience with false advertising because I wanted to fill a warm pool. To this day, I keep my pool at 90 because I think, what's the point if you call your pool heated and it's not heated? Right. I want to be able to go into it morning and night. So I had that same experience, but for me, it was those bronze markers that always got me. It said historical, and I used to look at my dad, I'd point, and boy, we just keep going right by it.
Yep.
But I don't, and that's probably the bane of my existence for my own children, stopping and looking at these single paragraphs about where a lot of times great drama occurred,
Yeah.
real drama. And that always fired my imagination.
Yeah, totally. And I remember, going back to the hotels for a second, that little bogus piece of paper they put on the toilet seat to tell you it was really clean. Like, whoever got to break that seal, like that was the special thing as a kid. Like, who's gonna rip that off? So Kevin,
No, listen, people are listening to us right now thinking, what century are these guys in?
Yeah,
but
they're
true.
They're Googling right now. Like, what the hell are they talking about?
Yeah.
Toilet seats with paper. So Kevin, if you're comfortable, I'd love to hear a little bit about the road trip you took at 18. So my understanding is you had about $350. You had a camper, a freaking canoe that you made, which is a story in of itself. And you drove all over the country. I got to feel like that really impacted your point of view as an adult. As well as what kind of led you to HearHere. It's almost like all these things we do during our life.
That trip did inform me. I mean, all along the way, I was also meeting strangers going into KOA camps. I just decided, I was always loved history.
Yep.
And suddenly I knew I was driving in the middle of it. And so I didn't have to coach my father to stop. I stopped. My traveling partner got a little upset with it at a certain point, but what's a road trip if you don't get upset with who you're on it with?
Totally.
But yeah, I did do that. I mean, that one trip led me to working on commercial fishing boats. The pipeline in Alaska was just opening. My ears were wide open. I was ready for adventure in my life. The canoe was to go down the rivers that Lewis and Clark went down. I was in the wrong century. There's no doubt about it. But those markers were something to me, and I keep hitting that, so I will quit hitting it. But when this opportunity came through Woody, my wife said to me, look, I think you ought to talk to Woody. And he explained it to me. The immediate ability to curate stories, to secure stories that have long since gone, to understand that where you're living, and you just see the people who were here first are not here. Mm-hmm. The drama that took place, the deceit, the level of ingenuity it took to create a life and shove somebody else out of their life is, while it's embarrassing and shameful, it's also interesting to me to know about that, to know where I live here in California, understand the Chumash, living perfectly normal lives, having, fought with their neighbors, whatever neighbors do, mm-hmm. evolve their language. And a guy lands in Haiti in 1492, 3 years, a Treaty of Tortillas created. And 60, 70 years later, the first boat is right off our coast, a 3-masted boat, to see what they own.
Yep.
The arrogance of that, the actual imperialism that came with that world. And for those people to who only had canoes at that moment, and then for that same boat to not return for another 60 years. Almost a vacant landlord, if you will. Mm-hmm. I'm sure those people were looked at like they'd seen UFOs, trying to explain to other people, no, it was big, it had this, it was this. Those stories thrill me.
Yep. Yeah, and they left nice parting gifts like smallpox and things like that behind.
There's no question. And in the instance of this first boat, they came through here finding nothing that was their mission statement, their mandate. There's no gold, right. There's no silver. The people look primitive. Oh, but there was one thing that they marked. There was always this constant smell of oil. And so what happens is, obviously the greatest gold rush happened right where they were going by. But it's these poor indigenous people who were kind of going, what in the world swirled around them. Yep. And so HearHere for me gave us the opportunity that whatever stories we would tell around the country, there was this thing called first contact. And they were never the same, the people that were here before. So I told Woody, I said, I'm interested in supporting this idea. I said, but I don't see how I can be a part of it, or even our company can be a part of it, unless we dedicate the idea to creating, curating stories of first contact, which was sometimes peaceful because at least, Europeans were smart enough to know they couldn't come in and push everybody around. It was just only once they got, the critical mass that they started shutting things off for people. But those stories, we have a chance to be a part of saving that. And, what's the mystery of life? You became a writer, what's the mystery? I became a storyteller to actually have a business where maybe I can be a part of saving stories lost, having stories there. There was a fit. That's all I can say. Long story short, there was a fit.
Right. Well, so I've written about the fact that, I'm also an investor, and I don't really like startups that have a celebrity involvement, because it's typically just drive-by involvement, right? It's like, oh, use my name, you can use my Insta account, we'll do 5 tweets or some, real regimented thing that doesn't add value. But I think everyone listening here can hear the passion in your voice as to why you joined the venture and you decided, I don't want to just have my name on it, but I really want to help. I want to help drive the direction, but I also want to put my shoulder to the grindstone a little bit and actually help make this thing work. And that's pretty unusual.
I've been really entrepreneurial with mine. I have a mortgage analytics company that I, help start up, and I've had things that, I'm in a personalized nutrition company that I was the first money, and I love a story, and so I'm actually always fair game for a swindler, because that means, swindlers can really get by me because I love a good story. I love the what if we did something, and I felt the same thing. In a sense with HearHere. I felt like, what if this could really be something special? That's all.
Yeah. And so I want to touch upon that a little bit more, because I know there was one story I heard you tell. You were I think you were filming Yellowstone, and you were going up the Lolo Pass on a day off and up the Bitterroot Valley. And I thought that story really epitomized why stopping at 2 mile markers that might be 150 feet apart is really important. So it's always, the problem is you stop the car and you get 3 semi-duds mile markers, and everyone in the car is like, see, I told you so. But
yes.
If you could just draw out a little bit of that story, because I think it's really epitomizes the value prop of what HearHere's about.
Right. I want to go back to your last question for a second, because I don't feel like I really asked that. I understand the celebrity thing. When you're a hood ornament, when you're being used, I get that. And I can't speak against it for it. I don't think I'm above or below any of it. But I like to help the person who has the idea. I like to help them. I'm not running from the idea and wondering how much I'm going to get from it. I think you have to, there's an authenticity that I like when I create my own friendships. Are they real, or are they designed around my celebrity?
Yep.
Right. So I won't ever be able to win that battle. Or he's this or he's that, but I am involved in what I do. But I think you framed the next question really well. I just actually like what you said, which is 3 markers, the moans 1, 2, 3, and they're all kind of whatever. The interesting thing about Lolo Pass was it's a river system, a stream system that runs perpendicular into a thing called the Bitterroot Valley. And there's probably 26 of those that, if you imagine a long river running almost east and west, if you will, north, south, east and west, there's these tributaries that are running into it. And one of them was called Lolo Pass, which doesn't feel very Indian, but that was a traditional path that they would make their way out to the plains to hunt the buffalo, and then when they had enough meat, they would come back and they would come through home. So it was a forced march to get out there, and then retreat back into the hills where they were safe. And this had gone on for thousands and thousands of years. And so I found the mark where Lewis and Clark had stopped that night with Sacagawea. Only 6 or 7 days later, she would actually save their lives, so to speak.
Yep.
But it was Lolo Pass, and her and she'd been captured and she raised somewhere else, and but she was now coming back to territory she understood. And it just mentioned that, in 1703, Lewis and Clark was right there. And for me, that was thrilling, right? I had the canoe. I'm the guy that built the canoe, want to go down these rivers. And so I was going this way, right? But on my way back, wherever I went to wasn't that interesting. There was a hot springs and a big building was built around it. And it seemed very unsanitary to me, really. It was like, why not just leave it open? Right. But anyway, so as I'm making my way back, I see a marker now on the other side. I remembered seeing where Lewis was, and about 200 yards, 100 yards, who knows? I read it. The first marker was 1703. The second marker was like 1765. And what was so pronounced and so sad and so revelatory was that at that place, 60, 70 years later, a barricade was put up by white people. And when they were making their traditional trip to the plains, they said, "You will never pass here again." So the hand of friendship, please help us, was extended in 1703. And less than 100 years, 60 years later, the door just shut on them as a people. They were creative enough, spontaneous enough to find their way around the mountains to go out. And that began their trouble, because once they didn't go on their traditional routes, and they began to venture into quote unquote other territory that over the centuries they had figured out what's yours and what's ours, that brought them into disputes with their neighbors. And so those two signs, thrilling moments, and one was the story that we know that replicated itself from sea to shining sea.
Yep. Well, I think that's the sort of epiphany that you get from HearHere that can spark an hour-long conversation, right? So you see those 2 mile marker, or you hear them in the case of HearHere, and then you can ask your kids, like, why do you think the settlers put up that wall? What, and then you could just spend this whole thing and easily consume an hour of conversation and learning, as opposed to noses and the devices.
And it's our job to, we're in our early stages, but it's our job to have backup stories that really get under the skin. That one is painfully obvious, that look what happened in 70 years, but look at the steady erosion of their life during that 70 years and identify those stories where there was just unbelievable unfairness that was going on there. So we have to get under that ourselves.
Yep. Well, I like to keep.
John, you make a good point about the, that idea of sparking the conversation, and we're hearing that from our users. They're taking trips with their kids, and while every story is not necessarily made for, is the whole family is going to love it. Some of it may smell a little bit like social studies or school, but the kids do, they are, a lot of these stories, they really do spark some interest. And we heard this family traveled for 2 months over the West during COVID, and they were coming down the 395 and would not have noticed the Manzanar signs, and wouldn't have come up in the conversation, but the HearHere story triggered. They heard about Manzanar. Their 10 and 12-year-old came with a flood of questions, because just this idea of the internment camp and the things that had happened and how we got to where we are today really influenced that and made that conversation that really makes these memories and for meaningful things that happen through travel that we don't learn in other places in our life, and just putting that place, that contextual piece of driving by the physical place made such a difference for them, and they'll never take another road trip without HearHere. Yeah,
no, I think I'm nodding my head vigorously, because I'm thinking in 30, 40 years, somebody's going to be doing an interview, and instead of talking about paper on toilet seats, they're going to say, yeah, my parents had this really cool thing where we drove and it would tell us stuff, and I learned so much, and that's why I became an anthropologist or whatever.
That's right.
So, definitely impacting folks. So Woody, I know you self-identify as a storyteller, and I think even before HearHere, a lot of emerging entrepreneurs, read my stuff and come on to Forbes to learn about, raising money, hiring that first employee, which is all storytelling, right? What tips would you give them, or what components do you think make up a great story?
Yeah, I think that ability to grow a company from nothing, into something that people care about, that's more about having a mission and doing it for a reason. Like my first company, it was about giving something to my kids that wasn't a video game, or it's something I could feel good about as a parent. And this is the next evolution of that. How do we give them something, give them a reason to look up from their devices in the car, give them something I feel good about as a parent, that we can all learn together, spark those conversations. And I definitely identify as an entrepreneur, and I have since before I knew what the word meant.
Yep.
When I was washing my neighbors' cars and mowing their lawns. And
yep. Guilty.
got a paper route going, and all those things, it seemed to be in my blood to some degree. And I don't know if I'm sure somebody said storytelling entrepreneur along the way. I feel myself as more of a story listener. I love a great story, and I feel like I can pick one out, and that's how things are moved, right? That's how things are moved along in business. That's how we innovate as a species, is really through stories and how we learn from the generations before us. So
no, I mean,
that's where, yeah.
You nailed it. I mean, I tell my students, I teach at UCSB, I teach entrepreneurship there, and I tell my students, think about how people learned up until the last, maybe we'll be generous to say 500 years or 1,000 years. They sat around a campfire and somebody told them a story that was entertaining enough to engage them, but inside that story was a message. Don't eat the red berries in June. Like there was some really important message embedded in a story that kept their engagement. So stories have been around forever, and have been the most effective learning tool that I've ever seen. And I feel like you guys are really leveraging the power of story. So I have a question.
Yeah, and something that's been, the oral storytelling tradition has somewhat been lost. We have tons of great mediums to tell stories.
Right.
And Kevin's part of one of the best. But I think this audio is a place we can do it in there's other opportunities to hear these stories, in some sense makes for a better fit, being able to use the natural landscape as the backdrop for a story.
It's always a problem too when you talk about that same campfire. It's probably important to note that a lot of people like to tell stories, but everybody in the group go, "Oh no, Roy shouldn't tell a story. He never gets to his point. Roy never embeds anything important. In fact, Roy forgets where he's at."
Yep.
So the thing about storytelling, why I've never been intimidated by the length, is a great storyteller will get to his point, and you never interrupt a great storyteller.
Right.
And throughout time, I'm sure the guys would look across the fire and go, "Oh no, Ed shouldn't start talking. Ed shouldn't start talking," but everybody lets him go. But then there's 2 or 3 around that campfire that when they're done, you kind of go to bed with that on your mind.
Yeah. Well, have you ever seen a Stephen King book? I mean,
Yeah.
he doesn't pare back his stories, but he keeps you going that whole way because he's
you can't. You understand, if you're careful, you'll also not lose your audience. You have to be careful.
Yeah, for sure. Well, speaking of storytelling, I'd love to hear like how all of the buzz that's surrounding Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces and Discord, all of these sort of audio platforms, are those helping HearHere, like because it's raising awareness, or is it noise that you guys are having to cut through and explain, no, we're different?
It's bringing more attention to the popularity of audio. It's not necessarily making audio more popular, but it's definitely on more people's radar now, which is only good for our business. It's the rising tide that lifts all the boats, and we're not competitive with them. Clubhouse is another opportunity to ultimately engage with our users or create community and have deeper discussions about the stories or the story development process. So it's, we like to see it. We like to see people writing and talking and engaging more with audio.
Yeah, good. I tried to do a music app right when Napster hit, and every meeting I was like, it's not Napster. It's not illegal. Like, because as soon as you said audio in that era, people were like, "Oh, I know all about that stuff." So I was just curious if you were having to deal with like, no, we're over here. So you rolled out, I think you had a soft launch, and then you had your official launch, I think in August of 2020. Love to hear like how the rollout has gone so far. Have there been any surprises? Like what learnings have you taken away from the first, 6 or 8 months so far?
Yeah, we launched at an interesting time, you know, in the middle of a pandemic.
Right.
There was already a resurgence in road travel. You know, it was up 38% 2015 to 2019. And then 2020, it was the only option for a lot of people. And then, you know, then it wasn't an option in many states where there were travel restrictions. So we've had a lot of unique macro circumstances. But, you know, I think the biggest surprise so far is people really not only wanting to hear the stories in the place, but interact with our content on a more regular basis, kind of like you would a podcast app. And we thought that there would be interest in using HearHere for travel inspiration and travel research. We didn't think it would come this early or often. So, you know, wanting to respond to that and make that more available is something that we're working on. And I think a great development. The other surprise would be demographic wise. We thought, you know, we would skew a little bit older, but 25 to 65 is pretty even across the board. It's less about, you know, how old you are and more about things that you care about. You know, how passionate are you about travel? How curious are you when you take trips or before you take trips? And you know, there's this theme of ongoing love of learning. So those we love to see that. You know, we don't think of ourselves as being boxed into a particular age. So we love that it's already reaching many demos.
Yeah, I mean, I see you as edutainment, right? Like this interesting, fun way to learn, sort of sneaky way to teach kids stuff without them really realizing it, right? You sneak up on them. So I'd like to end with what's HearHere going to look like in maybe 3 or 5 years, like as you evolve and as you start to maybe become a little bit more ingrained in the EDU market, or where do you sort of see the company going in, let's just say 5 years? And I'll throw that up to you.
5 years sounds like an eternity.
I know.
In the startup world, and I think, you know, we're excited about where we can go beyond just telling stories about places, but using contextual information to tell stories not only about your place, but the time of year, the season, the time of day. And really being able to deliver the right story at the right time, whether you're on a trip or you're on your morning commute, and being able to surface audio that people are going to care about, and it's going to be impactful. So I think just moving more towards an audio entertainment platform. We're very committed in the short term to making this the best travel and journey experience that's out there.
I love that catchphrase, the right story at the right time. That's really where, since you have that geolocating aspect, you can really drop in with that story that will work right there, and it won't work, you know, 20 miles down the road.
Yeah, and not forgetting, you know, that we're always starting at the beginning, you know, and we want to start with the first people, and you know, it's important to us, and thankfully overdue, but important to the greater population now. You know, wanting to know what really happened, and not the whitewashed version of history, but it's like there's people who are interested in that, and it's real, and we don't, like Kevin said, we don't have to run from it. It's more important that we have the information and we can do the best we can with it. Yeah.
The truth is always the right answer, right? Like, just go with the truth and everything will sort itself out. I'm super excited for you guys. As you know, I laughed about the 5-year comment. I helped start and sell a company in less than 5 years, you know, quite successfully. So I know it's like dog years. Entrepreneurship is like every year is like 7 freaking years anywhere else. So I should have said in 35 years, where will you be? But I'm really pulling for you guys. I think you have a great value prop. I do think you're going to be changing lives, like subtly over, you know, many car trips. But it's good stuff. So I really appreciate both of you taking the time to chat with me and inform my readers a little bit about what you're up to at HearHere. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.